you and a third person walking in the room. and it's starting time. So we will wait 2 minutes and then we will get started.
Hopefully just a little bit too fun of an evening as opposed to more people down.
Yeah, let's be optimistic. We'll go with that, Kathleen.
I see somebody in the room.
What's that?
I see somebody in the room.
What? So there are now 3 people
I was kind of joking. Sorry about that.
signing for her. Okay, physically there are 5 people in the room, 7 if you count us chairs. How's that? I just was not counting the chairs. Oh, I'm not worried. So Kathleen, the reason for the lateness is we're just coming off the lunch break.
Okay, that makes sense.
You can close a few things, you know, put out issues that you don't need anybody to argue with.
That's right.
That's, yeah.
Okay.
And assign new actions.
Yeah, I have no problems assigning actions. It's chasing the people to make sure they get addressed.
With nice weather, you might get low amount of attendance today. What's that? With the weather being so nice, you get low attendance today.
Oh, you
Yeah.
think people are out walking because of the weather? Yeah. Or maybe they're just shocked by the nice weather, so they're taking advantage of the good weather. Okay, it's 2 past the hour. People are straggling into the room. Hopefully those that are remote, you can hear myself and therefore Ned. Let me just do a volume check. Hopefully you guys can hear me okay.
Sounds good.
Nancy.
Yes, Nancy, you and Ned are loud and clear. This is Roman speaking.
Awesome. Yeah, we got a big room today. So with that, let's just go ahead and get started because people will just start straggling in.
Okay, so in case you weren't aware, this is session number 2 for RATS, and we're going to just go through some of the slides. So there's the note well information. Everybody should be familiar with that. And there's some meeting tips in the chair slides, mostly just a reminder to those who are attending in person to please wear your mask in consideration of those others in the room.
Masks are supposedly, well, not supposedly, they are mandatory for us that are on site.
Okay, and then there's pointers to the various information that and materials for the meeting that are also in the chair slides. And we should be familiar with the code of conduct. So we're going to move along to the agenda, which is here. So our first topic is going to be UCCS and UJCS for EAT, and Jerry is going to be presenting that. So.
Well, let's make sure. So this is the agenda bash?
Yeah.
So hopefully, let's just do a quick check. Everybody by now should have looked at the agenda. You're okay? Going once, going twice? So with that, we can move forward and head to the first topic. So Giri, in the interest of time, did you want to run the slides since you have?
I can run the slides, yeah.
Giri, do you have a preference? Ned is ready to run the slides.
Yeah, he can run the slides. I can't take notes today because I'm presenting, so I hope you have.
Yeah, so Thomas has graciously volunteered. Would prefer to have a second one, or multiple. So if those, Ned or Hank,
Hank.
you're everyone, but Hank, have you noticed? Okay, we'll move on. You were Hannes yesterday. Today you'll be Ned. If you can help with the notes, that would be awesome. Mr. Burkholz? Mr. Burkholz, can you help with the notes? Yeah. All right, thanks. Sorry, Giddy. With that, we can go ahead and get started.
Okay. Yeah, Ned, whenever you're ready. Thanks. So just by the way, even though I'm presenting, this is on behalf of the EATS editors, myself, Jeremy and Lawrence. So as most people know, there are two standards track working group documents for attestation tokens and RATs. One is EAT and the other is the UCCS specification, which Hank went over on the status yesterday. That stands for Unsigned CBOR Claim Set. And our goal, particularly as we're trying to drive EAT towards completion, is to establish a relationship between these documents. And as Hank went over yesterday, there's an assumption, even though the document is titled UCCS, that unsigned JSON claim sets are also should be supported. So just for the purposes of this presentation, when I use UCCS, it covers both unsigned CBOR and unsigned JSON. We could go to the next slide, please. So a couple of premises here. First is UCCS is scoped attestation. It's not a generic method to send unsigned CWT claims arbitrarily. The current UCCS draft makes it very clear that, about this limitation. And I'm not going to read that text. I think everybody can see that. But I think, moreover, this is a working group document, and therefore is actually scoped according to the current RATS charter. So that's one premise. The second premise, if you go to the next slide. UCCS does not always require a mutually authenticated secure transport. Now, the front matter of UCCS document does state the benefits of a mutually secured channel, but this is actually more of a security consideration. But in the opinion of the editors, it should not be a normative requirement. The reason this ties into EAT is because EAT makes no normative places no normative requirements on the transport layer. So I give an example there where a UCCS may be acceptable in a one-way authenticated TLS session, as an example. And obviously, in the web today, one-way authenticated TLS is quite common. Okay, we go to the next slide. So EAT is the RATS standards track for conveying standards track method for conveying attestation methods, attestation evidence, and as per this as per the current EAT and what has been documented and has been there for I guess probably a year, maybe even more. EAT can take three forms: one as a CWT, JWT, or as a UCCS. Therefore, EAT has a normative dependency in the UCCS definition, and therefore we have a dependency on a stable CDDL description, which is consistent with the rest of EAT. Let's go to the next slide, please. EAT is silent on normative requirements for underlying transport, as I mentioned, but there is a security consideration section. This is, EAT is general purpose. Not all EAT transports can be guaranteed to be through a mutually authenticated secure tunnel. I've worked, I'm working personally on Bluetooth implementations, for instance, and that would be a prime example where mutual authentication is not always feasible, at least not in the way that you expect with the TLS or DTLS connection. The other thing too that the editors will concede is that the EAT document itself will probably not do justice to all the security section considerations around transport of unsigned claim sets, and not even just transport, but when it actually makes sense to use unsigned claim sets and when it doesn't. And it's our opinion as the editors that actually would be better covered in a different dedicated draft. So let's go to the next slide. Yes, go ahead.
You've got Dave Thaler on the queue. So Dave?
Did you? Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, Dave, did you have a comment about the slide?
Actually, it's on the previous slide.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was trying to wait for a pause.
Sorry, I waited to put my hand up because I was checking the document, and my question is just a question on the top bullet there, where it says EAT is the method for conveying attestation evidence, right? And the working group has had a bunch of discussions about use of EAT for attestation results. So the question I was going to ask is there any use cases where where UCCS might actually apply to attestation results? There is actually a sentence in the UCCS document right now that only mentions evidence, and that's why I bring it up, because if there exists any use cases for EAT for attestation results where UCCS might make sense, then we might want to wordsmith to that one sentence that's in the UCCS document right now. But I don't know if there's any use cases for UCCS with attestation results.
Yeah. So Lawrence actually discussed a little bit about B2B relationships between a verifier and a relying party. Once again, it's kind of dependent on what the security considerations are in that kind of setup. It could be that what we're considering mutual authentication could be handled as something different from the transport layer. For instance, one-way TLS I mentioned, plus maybe an over-the-top authentication, accompanied by an over-the-top authentication, like a username, password, or a one-time password. So that would still be mutually authenticated. If that's the case, then then UCCS could be used in the conveyance of attestation results in that particular scenario.
Okay, so yeah, if we think there could be some case, there's just one sentence in the introduction which says that it discusses conditions for its UCS proper use in the scope of RATS and the conveyance of evidence from an attester to a verifier. And we might want to amend that as to make it either have two examples or just make that be for example to not overly constrain it, because I think all the rest of UCCS would apply if there's actually a use case. So. Yeah,
that's fine. I appreciate the comment, Dave. Yeah, I didn't want to get to, since I knew that the attestation results discussion was a whole separate topic. I didn't want to actually mention that in this slide, but I should. Yes,
that's why my comment is more on the introduction of the actual document itself, which was triggered by the point on the slide. So, all right, thank you. You can go on.
Okay. So let's go to the next slide here. I think
you mean the one after?
Oh yeah, pretty sorry. I think I got lost. Could you go back one slide? Let me see if I covered this. Yeah, no, we covered this here. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Let's get to the meat. Okay, so here's the editor's recommendation. The EAT document can provide the CDDL description for unsigned claim sets covering for both CWT and JWT. The EAT document will incorporate the request Diana for the Seaboard JSON tag to identify unsigned claim sets. And the current UCCS document would refocus on only security considerations for unsigned claims. And it could be informational track, and it could even could also cover some of the scenarios that Dave was just now mentioning, which are respect to not just attestation evidence but attestation results. If we go to the next slide. So why this change? The EAT document only requires a stable CDDL description of UCCS, and we're confident that it exists today. Thank you, Hank, and the other UCCS editors for working through that. The security considerations for UCCS, though, are I think we're, in my opinion, we're only just beginning, and the editors also feel that too. It may not close very quickly. And the other thing too is we don't want to see EAT implementers who actually require the UCCS option today to get held up. We do believe EAT can go to RFC with the reference to the UCCS ID and its security considerations, and that would be assuming that the working group acts on the recommendations of the previous slide. And UCCS document can then start to actually look more comprehensively at all the transport security considerations. I mentioned where one-way auth is sufficient. That's at the transport layer. I mentioned an example where the auth in the other direction could be happening at the application layer. Just now, my response to Dave. Role of the root of trust in securing transport, which is really one of the major considerations in actually coming up with the UCCS concept in the first place. I believe that's it for this slide. Deck. Do we want to pause for questions? I think we're at time.
Yeah, we are at time, but let's take 2 minutes for questions.
It looks like there are two on the queue. There are two on the queue too. So.
Okay. Roman, you're on the queue.
Hi, Gary. I just had a quick question about the security considerations of UCCS in EAT. Is that normative or informative? What's the nature of that? My concern is if it. Yeah. I'm sorry. If it's
it would. Yeah, go ahead.
Block the EAT document in misrep.
Sure. It would be informative, mainly because I think it's an evolving use case. We really don't know. We really don't have a full grasp of all the different usage scenarios of UCCS. Dave just mentioned attestation results, where I do think UCCS it can play a role. Yeah, it would be security considerations. I always view in the context of EAT, I would view as informative. Part of the reason is that EAT itself, since it's based on CWT, is what I sometimes refer to as a self-defending payload. So a deployer could actually have no dependencies on the transport layer at all. They could encrypt it. They could sign it. And it could go over multiple transport layers of varying security levels and security assurances, I should say, and still be as secure as the application calls for.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for clarifying.
Okay, so in the queue, somebody dropped off. I've got Kathleen, then Hank, then Karsten. So
I can be the end. That's not a problem.
You can be what?
I can be at the end. That is not a problem.
Okay. So for those on site, just so that I can keep a better order, if you can get yourself on the queue on the Meet Echo.
Oh, so yeah.
No, that's okay. I know for you, you're after Kathleen. So Kathleen, you're next.
All right, thank you. So just a couple of clarifying questions. And I was taking notes at the same time, so it might be just that I missed something. So I apologize if that's the case. So you mentioned the EAT authors wanting to fold this into the EAT draft. I would be against that, just in the amount of time taken. And then I guess we'd also need to understand, since EAT references this, what's going to be the holdup for this document to complete for EAT. And personally, I just like to see EAT make some quick progress and get through final publication soon. So I'm just looking to see how do we scope things and how do we, I guess, understand the timelines. So that's as a chair, right? So I'm just trying to understand timelines.
Well, I'm not saying, I didn't say fold the entire UCCS document into EAT. I just said the CDDL description. I think UCCS continues as a separate working group document. That is the holdup right there. We don't. We think we have. We think we can actually complete the CDL description for this. I don't know really. I don't know really what how that would take shape on the UCCS document, and there is a normative dependency in the document. So I didn't put that in there as an alternative because the editors feel the editors have agreed that this is actually the least painful path. But the other alternative is to eliminate all normative dependencies on UCCS. But I think that's going to be not fun either for implementers because any implementer comes to each document. They may first ask, okay, well, what if I don't want to sign this token? Then you get into uglier situations where an implementer might actually implement things that have killed us in the past on TLS security, such as null ciphers, which
Okay,
I think
guys,
we really want to avoid.
I'm going to have to call time, and I'm going to give it one more minute to give I can't speak for the draft since I'm an author, but since I'm running the queue, I would like Karsten and Henk as the other authors to speak for the UUCS draft. And then I'm cutting the queue.
Yeah, Karsten here. I have a practical problem and a more fundamental problem. The practical problem is that there is some weird stuff in section 8 of the current e-draft. I don't know if there is anything newer out there, but I think we will need a little bit of time to clean this stuff up if we want to go forward with that. But the more fundamental problem is that CWT actually was meant to be a general purpose specification. And I see a certain tendency of this working group to pull this stuff in and essentially claim CWT and kind of merge EAT and CWT. And there are some good reasons to do that, but there are also some good reasons not to do that in the extent that pulling over the CDDL into the EAT document would provide. So if we can get a clean separation between CWT as a basic mechanism and the CWT extensions that the EAT document provides, then I would be much happier.
I'll comment that this is a working group document. Therefore, it is narrowly scoped to the working group charter. It is not EAT cannot be a replacement to CWT in any and all use cases. Similar, my interpretation applies to UCCS as well.
Okay, Hank.
Yeah, I understand. Go ahead.
Yeah,
If Hank can be really quick, because
Yeah.
we do need to close and.
sure.
Yeah.
Just to reinforce what Carsten said is that UCCS is for CWT. And we have an application scenario. That is why we're doing the first UCCS core ID in RATS. And that's the usage and threat model and the security consideration of RATS, because a UCCS may and must never come without the prescription how to use it, because it is dangerous to use it without one. And I think that therefore it has to have context, and just by chance, it is here in the RATS working group, and just by chance, it is related to EAT. And that is, we have said this over and over again, and this is, I think, the 5th time I'm speaking up like this on the mic. So I can just repeat that, and it has nothing to do with EAT intrinsically.
Once again, it is scoped to attestation. You should the editors, if they wanted a general purpose method for conveying unsigned CBORD claims, probably should have taken this to another working group, maybe the ACE working group or CWT.
I can only
in the first place.
need the prescription.
We're done.
Yeah.
I just want to reiterate, we've had these discussions. We had the discussion with Jim Schott. Let's just move on, okay? And then we can have the discussion. Kathleen, as chair, posed the question of how we can help EAT accelerate moving forward, which means tightening its scope. So with that, let me just park it because we are well over time. And we can come back to it if we have time at the open mic. Otherwise, we will raise it again in the mail list. So next, Giri, you are on for attestation for cloud, I think.
Yes, so I thought I'd get ahead of this issue here, particularly since we're trying to wrap up EAT. A white paper came out from the FIDO Alliance on essentially what is cloud synchronization of private keys. These are private keys related to authentication credentials. This is actually discussed last summer during the Apple Worldwide Developer Conference. There are valid reasons for this. Private key synchronization can allow for ease of user adoption and ease of end user management of credentials, particularly when credentials have to move from one device to another, which could be, not just device migration or upgrade. It could also be lost devices as well, what we call device recovery, sometimes in the FIDO context. Let's move on to the next slide. So the okay, I knew this drawing wouldn't come out very well, but I'll just kind of talk to it. FIDO defines the authenticator restricted operating environment, which ideally would have some sort of trusted environment to encompass all the critical security sensitive authenticator operations. Those would be, for instance, by not just protection of private keys and signing operations, but associated signing operations, but also biometric match and the attester. The attester could very well be incorporated into the AROE. Let's move on to the next slide. So, as per the current RATS architecture, which, as was discussed yesterday, we really don't want to change significantly at this point. There are some underlying assumptions. One of them is that the attesting environment is sufficiently isolated from the target environment in which it can collect evidence about. The second part of that same section goes on to say, it goes on to discuss that a device that includes the role of a tester must not be able to modify or extract keys from the attesting environments. And then, unfortunately, it goes on to mention a FIDO authenticator. Now, we have a situation where implementers are actively extracting keys, although not necessarily the attestation keys. Let's move on. So as I mentioned, the FIDO authenticator may not have the separation between an attester and a target. In fact, FIDO authenticators could even be downloadable applications. And we have seen some implementers actually pursue that route. So the question I have to the working group is, should attestation evidence specifically address whether private key material is extractable? And a sub-question would be, should this evidence be accompanied by evidence that attestation keys are not extractable? And the lack of such evidence could also be used by an RP. Lack of explicit evidence is still a valid data point in any appraisal policy. So that's the explicit evidence. You can also take the route of what I call implicit evidence, which would be if the RP determines whether the authenticator allows extractable keys by some other means, such as an endorsement. EAT also carries digital letters of assurance, DLOAs, that might actually be sufficient for an RP to make a determination, or a verifier if you want to keep the two separate. And by the way, in FIDO parlance, we always assume that the verifier is integrated in the RP. Okay, let's move on. Next slide. So a couple of ways forward. We could define the relevant evidentiary claims in the EAT document, but that would be assuming that extractable keys are more general interest than just authenticators. we could leave the issue to an e-profile for FIDO compliant authenticators, and then we can define relevant evidentiary claims in the profile, or we could do nothing and let the RP figure out via appraisal process or via some sort of implicit evidence or some other means. And that's it. I don't believe I had any other slide on this. So I just decided to raise this topic. If I don't see any interest, we won't pursue the first bullet, and we'll probably leave any potential solution to the latter two. Okay, I'm done.
Hank is coming to the queue.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm learning this. 3 days in and still not good at this. Hi, this is Hank. My first instinct is, oh geez, no. That was first instinct, like changing the private key material of a tester. But then you said, but this comes with an endorsement. So if my, I want to say root of trust, okay, if my testing environment has this capability of the key material being changed, and that's very clear alongside with every endorsement that the verifier can do that, that is fine. But how do I guarantee that there is an endorsement? How do I not guarantee that the self-assertion of my testing environment is, hey, my keys are not exchangeable, and they in fact are. So without a good understanding of the security considerations, how to make endorsements here really, really trustworthy and working is the core of the problem, I think. It's not actually the problem to change the key. The problem is that you must always be aware that this can happen when you talk to something that has that capability, right? So that's my comment here. So I'm not entirely adverse, but it looks like very dangerous terrain to me.
Okay. Thanks. I don't know how to. I don't know if you're expecting a response on that. I'll take that as a general comment. Thanks, Hank.
Okay, Dave is in the queue.
Yeah, I agree with your last summary, Gary. I think right now, and I don't claim to fully understand it, but right now out of these three ways forward, I pick the second one.
Okay.
Uh-oh, I think Lawrence is getting in the queue. Are you in the queue?
Oh, there I am. Okay.
Yeah.
I just think there's a really big difference between FIDO authentication keys and attestation keys. So export of attestation keys is a really big deal, and it is relevant to this group. FIDO authentication keys, if that's all that's being happening with FIDO, then that's a FIDO thing, and FIDO should take care of that. So that would probably be a 2 or a 3 on your list there.
Thanks, Lon.
Okay, so Gidi, if you wanted to solicit interest, I think it would be good if you can post it on the mail list and,
okay,
explain the use case and usage and relevance,
mm-hmm,
and see what you get from the mail list response.
okay. All right. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Oh, sorry.
It's okay. Tony Nadlin. So Gary, I would rather see us do nothing in this particular space and let FIDO or whoever wants to create the profile, since they're the, they're the experts in this particular case. I don't think it makes sense for this group to do anything with that profile.
Okay. Thanks,
We have
Tony.
some guidance there. All right. Thanks, Anthony. Sorry, I missed that on the queue. Okay. At that, now we will close, and we have Thomas.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you fine.
Good, good. Cool. Okay, let's start with the goal of this document. So the scenario is we have one or more authorized supply chain actors in the form of OEMs, ODMs, independent software vendors, silicon providers, etc., that need to come together and describe an attester to a verifier, so that when evidence from the attester is passed on to the verifier can use what it learned about the attester from the supply chain to evaluate the evidence according to its appraisal policy, of course. The idea being that if we have a standard information and data model, then there's an induced network effect, which is likely to reduce the fragmentation that is observed today. And this should lower the barrier to entry in the supply chain actor space, which is currently highly fragmented, and eventually bring us to a better place. Obviously, we think this is a very important work that has not been tackled in a comprehensive way, and Quorum is an attempt to deal with this. And the new proposed charter text includes scope for this work to be taken in by the group. But for the time being, since we still live under the old charter, the draft meekly waits at the periphery of the working group. So next, please. Okay, so to clarify, what is the scope of concise RIMs? Here we are looking at the endorsement and reference values, arrows that go into the verifier. So we are not concerned at all with conveyance of appraisal policies here. And besides, Quorum defines the payloads, not the underlying transport. So surely we want this to be compatible with REST APIs, which is obviously a very natural target for transporting Quorum payloads, and therefore we're making sure that the right media types are in place from the onset. But apart from providing this kind of glue, we're not interested in promoting one transport or another. Effectively, Quorum is transport agnostic. Yeah, I think I'm done with this. Next, please. Okay, so a quick refresher on the design principles for those who don't know or have forgotten. So we describe an attester in terms of triples, which are simple stereotyped sentences with subject, verb, and object, which allow us to say things like, target environment T has reference value X, or attesting environment A has verification K, Y, or target attesting / attesting environment T prime A prime has endorsed value Z. And since the set of triples is extensible, we can potentially say many more things. For example, if you wanted to express relationships between sub-attester in a composite device, we could do that just by minting a new triple, which provides the needed semantics. This whole thing gets then serialized in CBOR, and I think that's where the concise in Quorum comes from. And then we can sign them with COSI. And therefore, the triples can become, in fact, quadruples by adding the COSI signer as the subject of the statement that is encoded in the triple. Okay, next, please. So status recap, where we are. So the information model has been done in TCG, specifically in the DICE working group. And it's in a document called DICE Endorsement Architecture. It's quite stable, I would say. In fact, it's been successfully balloted last week, which means there is consensus in the working group there in TCG to proceed with publication. But I'm not a TCG actor. In fact, I'm a newbie there, so I'll let Hank and Ned correct me if I'm talking rubbish. But this should be roughly correct, I think. The data model is maintained in GitHub, in a GitHub repository that is linked in the slide, and it's what you'd expect. Basically, there's a bunch of CDDL describing the serialization details and a number of examples in CBOR diagnostic notation, and with that, all the automatic assembly and test infrastructure hooked into a bunch of GitHub actions, so that we make sure that any change we introduce is correct. And we have also built a fairly complete software implementation, which tries very hard to track as close as possible the bleeding edge in the CDDL above, which includes Quorum, comids, which are sort of the core building block. That's where the triples are stored, and COSWID2. This is all library code in Golang and handy CLI built on top of it that is readily usable. Next, please. So the questions. Clearly, we cannot call for adoption now because the charter text that contains the scope extension that allows Quorum to be a RATS work item is not yet in. So I think the question we can ask the group is whether once the new charter is in place, would quorum be considered for adoption? Yeah, I think that's the fair question that we can ask now.
Okay, so for now, you've got Dave Taylor on the queue.
Hi, Dave.
Dave Taylor, hey Thomas. I think that this is a good document, and if the charter effort goes through, then I think this would be absolutely appropriate to be done in RATS. So I think this is good work. I think my only other comment or question, I think the value of this is for the, if you don't mind, can you go back to the little diagram that showed the which lines and stuff, you know what I'm talking about? Yeah, this one. I think the primary value of this one is in specifying the reference values, because there's a format for that that doesn't cleanly fit into any other document that we have, right? Because you need your verbs, right? You may need to have sets of values. You know, your reference values may have the following claim needs to have any of the following values, and so it's not a singleton, it's a set, right? So that's what I think the value of CORIM is. There's with relation to the left line, though, I don't think there's a strong case for that, although reference values could be bundled with endorsements and have both lines coming from the same body when the two top roles are the same entity, right? When your endorser is also a reference value provider, you can do both. But I'm not sure that CORIM has a strong case for endorsements, as opposed to one place in the document it says reference values for evidence and endorsements, and I completely agree with that, right? Because your endorsements have claims, your evidence have claims, and they're compared in appraisal policy to say to the endorsements and the evidence to those claims together match, you know, the following reference values. I get that. There's a different place in the document that says that the CORIM format itself can be used for reference values and endorsements. And I like the first phrase, and it says these are reference values for comparing or appraising endorsements and evidence, rather than saying you'd put evidence themselves in the CORIM format. I think if you did that, I would consider that to be reference values in the CORIM format with some additional endorsement stuff shoved in there too. And so I might try to scope the work to say keep endorsements out of it and just concentrate on the reference value provider line, which of course could be combined with an entity or whatever. I think there's a stronger case for that. So, but anyway, other than that, I think that the document is great. So.
Okay, cool. On your question, on your point, where would you put, say for example, I need to interface with the certification body, right? So it's not, you know, it's not a supply chain.
If they are, okay, this is my personal view. If there are information needed in the appraisal policy that cannot be expressed in the same sorts of things that EAT uses, and I phrase it that way because EAT may not be the only format if you have a proprietary one, right? But if it's not isomorphic to EAT, then I would put that in the reference values line and say, okay, you just have different verbs there, sure, but I would still call that the reference values line to answer your question. Okay, it's just how you define the lines, and so I'm defining the line that way, maybe differently than how you define the line. So.
Yeah, I think there's a semantic mismatch here. Yeah. So okay.
Now the architecture document is generically phrased enough to punt this question down the road, and I think that's perfectly fine, right? It says once we recharter, then the discussions like this start to become in scope. But my main feedback is yes, I think it would be appropriate for the working group to work on this and continue this discussion. So.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks, Dave. Hank?
Yeah, so let's start with Dave's point first, because that's fresh in my mind. I think endorsements can live without reference value provider statements. So yes, this could be there could be a CORIM that's just about endorsers. I think reference values always refer to someone who is authoritative to tell them, and that's kind of similar to how you describe an endorser. Because the reference value have to come from the authority that creates reference about a component of your layered device and dice, and then, yeah, you have to point to that at least. So the identity part of the endorser has to go somewhere into reference value, reference integrity measurements, because otherwise you don't know which attesting environment is supposed to tell you and evidence about which target environment. This relationship is very important, and sometimes it gets a bit lost along the line. So I think, yes, endorsements could stand by themselves. Reference values need pointers to endorsers. So that's a very minimum where this overlap happens. And I think the quorum can be designed, maybe there's some tweaks here that we can do, that we can accommodate for the RVP and the endorser being very separate. And both of them then can be combined by verifier. So I think that might be a check we still have to do with the CDDL. So I think that is accomplishable. So well, thank you for the comment. I think we have to take into account that the green boxes at endorser and RVPs are very separate, but still the RVPs are about things that the endorser will talk about. So there is some relationship there. And another thing I want to say, because Thomas is so modest about this, there's already a corresponding a profile of quorum, which is the PSA endorsement token. So that is going hand in hand. So we're not just doing this as like the big bulk, but we're doing the application of it, of course, as a not only proof of concept, but an actual line of work in parallel. Thank you.
True. Thank you, Hank.
Go ahead, Lawrence.
This is Lawrence. First, I just want you to know that Roman has more books than you.
These are not books, they're comic books. It's a
Oh,
different
okay, well. Okay, all right. So, so the reference values have to correlate to measurements in evidence. Otherwise, you don't know what to do with them, right?
Yep.
So there's got to be something going on in evidence that some format, however the measurements are transmitted, that you can correlate them to the right reference values. Now, my understanding, so there's an implication there for EAT, basically. What I'm thinking is, but I think this is being handled, and I just wanted to surface the topic. I think it's being handled because EAT allows plug-in formats for measurements. So one of the formats for measurement is a SWID, but I don't know what you're doing here. I think I'm a little, what's that? Yeah, you do. So can you use a SWID with this?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Okay, well that is probably, but there's also co-mid, or I'm sorry, I get my co-mid and my co-rem mixed up.
Co-rem contains co-mid schema and co-SWID schema.
Okay. All right, got it, thank you.
Cheers.
Okay, I think the queue is closed. To your question, Thomas, you are correct. And Roman also, as our AD mentioned, as a process reminder, we cannot adopt the document.
Of course, yes.
You did have Dave Thaler speaking in favor, given the scope that he described. The question I'll ask as the chair is, I guess I'll do the poll, is how many people have actually reviewed the draft? If you can show a hand, answer yes to the poll. I keep forgetting we're hybrid. Have you read the co-rem draft? So what I'd like to see, Thomas, is get some feedback to make sure that there's interest, and some have read the draft and agree. I mean, I'll pick on Dave. It looks like he has read the draft. From a process is after we charter, we want to get some level of feedback on whether the draft is ready to be adopted. So if I don't have volunteers, well, actually, I should say, if we don't have enough people that have read the draft, then I'll ask for volunteers to provide feedback just to test the level and then do the call for adoption. But this is all after we recharter, right?
Fantastic. That works for us.
Okay, I'm going to give it 10 seconds. What's that? Okay. Shoot, what I should have done is asked who's read the draft, who is not an author. But that's why I should have clarified that. Okay. So For those who have read the draft, to the authors, did you do a new revision? I don't recall. In January, okay. Okay.
So this is Henk. So why because we can't be adopted, this is not very transparent because it's just a related document, but there's significant work on this for over 1.5 years. So yes, we update in regular intervals that are not even the cutoff.
So if I can
So
make
yeah.
a distinction, Hank, the authors could be doing significant work. What I'm trying to assess is, besides the authors, in the participants of this working group, are there enough besides the authors interested in this work?
Yeah, interested in having read it might be different things, and also, yeah, I'm sorry, this is a fact, right? So, and we had 15 or 17 votes to being interested on the email list during Christmas already. So I would like to have them into account if we talk about people interested in having this work. Yeah, they may not be in this room here, even virtually right now.
Well,
yeah, just highlighting there was 17, 15 votes about.
So I'm just saying we're going to do all that again now that we know it's in, once we know it's in scope.
Okay, yeah. But you could also refer to that.
Remember, I have to refresh the people that we have to go through this again. Okay? Okay, so with that, thank you, Thomas.
Cheers. Thank you.
Great. So we are not too far out of our agenda. We're only 11 minutes late, but we did leave enough time for open mic. If there are no others, the chairs actually have a question. Anything anyone wants to raise? Gidi, you're on the queue.
Yes, I want to get back to my presentation. I want a clear guidance from the group on resolving the circular dependency between UCCS and EAT. Now, remember, I appreciate Hank and Carson's comments, but EAT does share an editor with UCCS, so I don't even believe the UCCS editors are in consensus on the disposition of that document. So I'm asking the chairs directly, how do you want to handle this?
Well, to be honest with you, and I, as an author of UCCS, I can't discuss that because I'm an author, but as a chair in general for the EAT draft, one of the questions that we had as chairs, sorry, is we are concerned about the progress and maturity. And the question that we wanted to put forward to the EAT authors is your expected timeline. If you notice the milestones that we updated, we noted, I think it was in 112, we noted using guidance by you as the authors that the draft should be ready for working group last call in April. My concern is that you provided 2 presentations that can grow that and stretch that timeline.
No, I think the second one actually, the first one, no, I don't believe so. We think we can actually resolve that. The second one, I think the feedback was that we can actually, at least the one that I provided was that it would be, it looks like the consensus is that would be better handled in a profile. I think the attestation results is the attestation results discussion doesn't belong in there. It would not derail the EAT document. And if certain people feel that they are, I think we should take it to working group consensus rather than having individuals with their own opinions derail the progress of the stack. I do think, though, this UCCS dependency needs to be resolved. I'm asking the chairs once again a recommendation as to how they would like to see it resolved.
So we had at one point a set of gating items for working group last call. This was discussed maybe a year ago. And there was, on that list at the time, there was 2 or 3 gating items. If we go through the list of topics that are being discussed, there are several more topics that are being discussed than those gating item topics. So the question from the chairs is, what are the gating items exactly, and how
Yeah.
can we, disposition
Yes,
the discussion?
let's focus on one, the circular dependency between EAT and UCCS. So the editors gave a recommendation. It sounds like there isn't consensus on adopting the recommendation that the editors provided. So I'm asking for an alternate proposal.
Go ahead, Hank, you're in the queue.
Okay, 2 items. First of all, we can give a written statement of consensus of the editors after we've synced after this IETF meeting, and I'm pretty sure that's easy. I don't know where this is coming from. The second item is you do not have a circular dependency of UCCS. You can just do EAT. Just do EAT. And the UCCS part can be applied to any CWT, and we give you even guidance how to do it with EAT. So I think you don't have any dependence at all, just don't mention it. I think this is a decoupled problem. That's how it is designed. That's why we are not holding anything up, because we made the smart decoupling of the problem. You can just create an EAT specification and then say, and UCCS applies to it. In UCCS, there's no recursive thing. That's an imaginary problem.
So just to clarify, are we saying we rip out all mention of UCCS in the EAT document, and that can actually resolve this? That's, if there's working group consensus, and that is certainly one way forward.
No.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, Dave is on the queue.
I'm going to repeat a comment that I made in chat a while back during the presentation, but I think it's consistent with what Kathleen and Nancy had commented at the time, and similar to, but not the same as what Hank just did. Okay. My opinion is that the best way forward would be to remove all the normative content about UCCS out of EAT and change it to be an informative one. And yes, I know that's work, right? Because that would entail moving some stuff that's in the EAT spec into the UCCS doc. I see Lawrence nodding, so I'm hoping that means, yeah, you understand what I'm saying. I think that is actually doable, okay? And that is actually the fastest path to getting EAT to RFC. Okay, so that's what I would argue as the alternative, is to say, take the normative content, move it into the UCCS document, leave informative content that says, there might be future work on doing such and such, or, whatever it is that's an informative reference. I think that's perfectly fine. That's the only difference between what Hank said and I said, is I would leave it as an informative reference, because you can informatively reference work in progress, right? And so UCCS would become work in progress as far as as an RFC pops out is concerned, right? Because it won't have hit the RFC editor by then, right? So it'd be listed as an net draft informative reference. I think that's the way that I would go. I think that's the fastest past RFC. So.
Okay, so let's do this quick. Lawrence?
So the problem is the CDDL. That has to be a normative reference. So you can, I mean, I know how to make a soft reference or an informative reference, but I need the CDDL for a CWT in EAT to make the CDDL in EAT complete. That seems like a hard reference to me, and that was why we proposed bringing that CDDL into EAT. If the CDDL stays in UCCS, then we do have a normative coupling, and they have to go together to last call or something like that, or they have to progress together.
Well,
right?
we have packaged drafts together like we did with Riv and Tara.
So I don't. Yeah, I don't know what CDDL you're talking about, to be honest. Are you talking about the JC generics? Because I have no idea what you mean. So again, it's defined by CWT. Okay, that makes more sense now. Maybe you should have elaborated on what you mean. Okay, the CDDL for CWT doesn't have to be in EAT. You just define more claims. Every other CWT enhancing document has done that exact same way. I think there's no blocker there.
Okay, guys, Ned has to chair, and I'll just echo Dave's comment that he says you can keep the CCDL and EAT and not make the main CCDL depend on UCCS. Yeah, I think so. What Hank said. Yeah. Well, so before we close, Ned wants to do a poll, just so that we can give the EAT authors guidance.
Okay, so raise your hand if you agree to the motion of moving normative information that's currently in the EAT spec and changing it to being informative.
For
For
UCCS.
UCCS.
Yeah. So we'll do 10 more seconds. Be quick, guys, since we're out of time. What?
14 to 15 to 4. 16 to
Okay,
3.
so you have to call it.
Okay, so we're just looking at the information coming in. It looks like there's consensus around moving or migrating the normative
to
informative that relates to UCCS in the EAT spec.
Gidi asked for guidance, so we asked the group for guidance. Okay, sorry, we're out of time. So, Lawrence, if you have issues.
Thank you. That's good. We'll I'll document my understanding and post it to the mailing list. Okay.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone. And again, we'll keep going on the mail list.